Medieval Europe was a world where laws were harsh, justice was often swift, and punishment was meant to make a lasting example. Theft was not just a minor offense, but a direct challenge to the order and stability of society. In an era where most people owned little more than the clothes on their backs and a few tools to make a living, stealing could mean the difference between survival and starvation. It was taken seriously by rulers, judges, and local communities. As a result, punishments for thieves were severe, public, and often humiliating. The goal was not only to deter the criminal from stealing again, but to discourage others from even thinking about it. To understand why theft was treated with such severity, it helps to remember that medieval economies were fragile. Villages relied on trust and mutual dependence. Stolen chicken could mean a family went without food, and the loss of tools could destroy someone's ability to work. There were no police forces in the modern sense, so communities were expected to maintain their own order. Justice was often a blend of law, tradition, and public spectacle. Many punishments were not carried out behind closed doors, but in the open, where everyone could witness the consequences. For minor thefts, the punishment might be designed to shame rather than maim. Public humiliation was a favorite tool of medieval justice. A common method was to place the thief in the stocks or pillory, wooden devices that locked the criminal's head and hands in place so they could not move. These were set up in busy market squares where the entire community could see the offender. Passers-by might jeer, throw rotten food, or shout insults. The embarrassment was sometimes worse than the physical discomfort. Few hours in the stocks could mark someone for years, as the memory of their crime lingered in the minds of neighbors. Another form of humiliation was the wearing of special clothing or symbols that marked the person as a thief. This might involve shaving the offender's head or branding their skin with a hot iron. In some places, thieves had their ears cut off or their noses slit, so that anyone who saw them would know they had been caught stealing. These punishments were both a penalty and a warning. In small communities where everyone knew each other, such marks could destroy a person's ability to live a normal life. For repeat offenders or those who stole valuable items, punishments escalated quickly. Medieval justice often operated on the principle that harsher crimes deserved harsher consequences. This could mean whipping, mutilation, or even execution. Flogging was a common punishment, with the thief tied to a post and lashed in front of the crowd. The number of lashes varied, but the pain was intense, and the scars long-lasting. In some towns, thieves had their hands cut off, a brutal reminder that they had once used those hands to steal. It was both symbolic and practical. Without hands, stealing became nearly impossible. Execution for theft might sound extreme, but in some parts of medieval Europe it was not unusual. Hanging was the most common method, often reserved for those who repeatedly committed crimes or stole items of great value. The gallows were a public spectacle, with townsfolk gathering to watch the sentence carried out. The purpose was to frighten others into obedience. Death was the ultimate deterrent, and rulers believed it sent a clear message. Theft would not be tolerated. In certain regions, especially during times of famine or unrest, the authorities could be even more ruthless, hanging thieves for stealing food or livestock. Punishments varied greatly depending on where and when the crime took place. Medieval Europe was not a single unified state but a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies and city-states, each with its own laws. In England, the bloody code of later centuries had its roots in medieval thinking, where theft could easily lead to hanging. In parts of France and the Holy Roman Empire, thieves might be boiled in oil, drowned, or burned, though these punishments were rare and typically reserved for notorious criminals. In the Italian city-states, public whipping and exile were common, especially for those who stole from wealthy merchants or public funds. Some medieval communities preferred a form of restorative justice, especially in rural areas where everyone depended on each other. Instead of mutilation or death, the thief might be forced to pay compensation to the victim. This payment, called wergeld in some places, was often several times the value of what was stolen. If the thief could not pay, they might be forced into servitude, working for the victim until the debt was considered repaid. This was more practical in small villages where labor was valuable in removing a member of the community. Through execution could be harmful to everyone. Religious influence was also strong in shaping how thieves were punished. The church condemned theft as a sin and sometimes offered penance as part of the punishment. A thief might be ordered to fast, make a pilgrimage, or publicly confess their crime in church. However, church courts were generally more lenient than secular ones, focusing on spiritual reform rather than brutal physical punishment. That said, a thief who stole from a church could expect no mercy, as such crimes were seen as an attack on God himself. Public shaming remained one of the most powerful tools of medieval justice. The community aspect of punishment was crucial because it reinforced social order. Everyone was expected to participate, whether by watching the punishment, jeering at the offender, or simply spreading the story. In many cases, the fear of disgrace was enough to keep people honest. A single act of theft could follow a person for life, making it difficult to marry, trade, or be accepted in respectable company. The threat of punishment was also tied to the idea of honor, which was deeply important in medieval society. For craftsmen, merchants, and peasants alike, having a reputation for honesty could mean survival. To be branded a thief was to lose that honor, and with it, the trust needed to make a living. This was why punishments were so often public and visible. There was no hiding from the damage done to one's name. There were also traveling thieves and bandits who operated outside the bounds of any one village or town. These were harder to catch, and when they were captured, the authorities often dealt with them harshly. Banditry along trade routes was a serious threat to merchants, and rulers needed to protect commerce. In such cases, punishment was swift and final, with little concern for leniency. Hanging, beheading, or even breaking on the wheel were used to send a message to others who might prey on travelers. Some punishments were meant to be creative and memorable. In certain German towns, for example, a thief might be locked into an iron cage and hung in the marketplace for hours or days, exposed to the weather and the ridicule of passers-by. In other places, thieves were forced to carry the stolen goods through the streets as a form of mockery before being whipped or fined. These punishments served as both entertainment and deterrent, blending justice with spectacle in a way that seems almost theatrical by modern standards. By modern eyes, the punishments for theft in medieval Europe may appear cruel or excessive. But in a time when law enforcement was local, resources were limited, and survival often hung by a thread, such severity was seen as necessary. The fear of public humiliation, physical pain, or death was one of the few tools communities had to maintain order. And while not every thief faced the gallows, the possibility was always there, lurking in the minds of anyone tempted to take what was not theirs. Over time, as cities grew and legal systems became more structured, punishments began to shift. By the late medieval period, some urban centers introduced more standardized laws and less brutal penalties. Fines, imprisonment, and exile became more common, especially for lesser thefts. Yet the legacy of harsh medieval punishments lingered, shaping attitudes toward crime for centuries. The image of a thief in the stocks or dangling from the gallows remained a potent reminder of the dangers of crossing the law. In the end, the way thieves were punished in medieval Europe reflected the values and fears of the time. Communities prized stability, honor, and trust, and any threat to those things was dealt with harshly. Whether through humiliation, mutilation, or execution, the goal was always the same: to protect what little people had, and to remind everyone that the cost of theft could be far greater than the reward. It was a world where justice was public, personal, and often unforgiving, and where the fate of a thief could serve as a warning for generations. So as we have seen, being a thief in medieval Europe was far more than just a bad career choice. It was a gamble with your life, your dignity, and your future. The punishments were brutal, creative, and designed to make sure everyone remembered the lesson. Whether it was being locked in the stocks for hours of public humiliation, branded for life so no one would ever forget your crime, or facing the gallows for stealing something of value, the consequences were severe and visible to all. These punishments might seem extreme to us now, but for a world where communities relied on trust and survival, often hung by a thread, they made sense to the people of the time. The threat of shame, pain, or death was the strongest deterrent they had. Every punishment was a message, not just to the thief but to the crowd watching. Break the rules, and this could be you. So the next time you hear about medieval justice, remember that it was not just about the crime. It was about protecting a fragile way of life. In those times, the price of theft was far higher than anything a thief could hope to steal.